I stole those folders from the library because I felt that if they stayed there, in that basement on 25D Mayo Street, they would eventually rot away. The mold was eating the warnings from that guy Bagabot right along with the paper. The subfloor of that building has a rancid, thick odor that scrapes the back of your throat like breathing bone dust. Delia, the librarian, looked at me sideways when I walked out with the bundle under my arm, but she kept silent. I tucked the folders into my side messenger bag, right next to my old notebook, and went out onto the street. I walked down San Martin Street to try and calm myself. Mar del Plata in winter has that air that cuts your face, a dirty cold that doesn't ask for permission. I zipped up my patent jacket and ducked into the Galeria Secoa just to find an open Wi-Fi network and listen to the deafening noise of the arcade machines. I needed to log into the encrypted breach forum. Inside, under my moderator alias, the guys who followed urban glitches were waiting for my posts. I rationed the information. I shared reports about magnetic interference on the coast and dull thuds beneath the downtown asphalt, but I was careful not to leak a single page from Bagabot's real folders. I sat at La Fuente de Oro for a double coffee. I opened the notebook and checked the forums while staring at the fogged-up window. Outside, the plaza was as usual, pigeons and the monument enduring the wind. Suddenly, I saw a white truck pass by without a license plate. Something tightened in my neck. My right hand, resting on the keyboard, began to freeze little by little, the fingers stiff over the keys without my having ordered them to. I slammed the notebook shut, stuffed it into the messenger bag, and hurried toward La Perla. I reached the height of Chacabuco Street. The coastal stone wall felt like the edge of something else. The cement picado by the Salador seemed to want to break loose from the stone. I walked down the service ramp where the boulevard merges with the cliff. The entrance to the vault was an open secret circulating in whispers on the very same forums I moderated. I walked down a brick hallway bathed in a thick humidity that clung to my clothes. Crossing the entrance under that massive concrete dome was like stepping into an underground freezer. The walls sweated a milky, cold water that ran in dirty threads to the floor. The echo of my footsteps sounded strange, muffled by a slippery film on the cement, and the air had a physical resistance that forced me to push with my body to move forward. The smell was unbearable, rotten leather, mold upon mold, and that aroma of rusted iron rising from the main pipes that dead-end at the cliff. Then the main space opened up, immense, losing itself in the interior mist. The silence was broken only by a rhythmic dripping, plock, plock, plock. "Careful, boss," hissed a guy passing by carrying a lead box, his eyes bloodshot. I looked up. There were light bulbs casting a bluish, sad light, barely enough to distinguish silhouettes. In the blackness of the ceiling, shapes could be felt moving, causing creaks and gusts of freezing air that smelled of wet dog and ozone. The fair was a market mounted on rusted diesel barrels and rotten boards, flanked by a cemetery of tube TVs with cracked screens and scrap metal of all kinds. The vendors sat on low stools, their faces gray with cold, their eyes fixed on nothing. I saw stalls with metal pieces that floated just a few millimeters off the table with an electric hiss. Jars with biological remains that throbbed to the rhythm of the tide, things with too many fingers, eyes that followed me with a sick curiosity. An engine that spat sparks smelling of burnt rubber. A cellar offering memories on magnetic tapes that hissed secrets into your ear. I reached the Descartes stall, a corner that smelled of phosphorus and burnt wires. The cellar had skin like old leather and watchmaker hands, long and precise. On the table, between rusted keys and compasses pointing in every direction, lay it. Under a layer of dust, the stone had a dense, green vein. It seemed to swallow the light around it, creating a black hole in the wooden board. I stretched out my hand. My fingers closed around the mineral. To the touch, I didn't feel the roughness of common stone. It was a subtle cold, a freezing needle that seemed to enter straight and silent into the flesh, just under the skin of the palm. The tips of my fingers left a throb with an imperceptible vibration. I paid what the old man asked without arguing, stuffed the quartzite into my jacket pocket, and left quickly toward the exit. I came out of the ramp and the sea wind hit my chest like a shove. In La Perla, when it gets dark suddenly and a storm kicks in, the coast turns mean. The pretty postcard of lit-up buildings disappears and what is left is a wall of darkness roaring down there, against the stones. I walked along the maritime boulevard sidewalk. The right side of my body felt heavy, as if my pocket were full of wet sand. The subtle cold from the stall had transformed into a constant, dull pull, as if the mineral's inertia were squeezing my bone from within. I pulled my right hand out to look at it under the street lamps. My fingertips were a matte gray, covered by a fine film that looked like quartzite dust. I got a hell of a scare. I started walking faster, almost running, moving away from the coast. I needed to get home. But the white truck turned with me, crossing the corner without a sound, like a shadow stretching across the asphalt. I looked back and there they were, those red eyes pulling away from the curb, moving slowly, always maintaining the same distance. They didn't flash their lights, they avoided honking. They were simply there, like a shark following from the deep without showing its fin. My hands were sweating despite the cold. I stopped for a second against the stone wall, in front of the beach clubs. The sea was choppy, with those waves that break and leave a foam that looks like accumulated filth. I looked toward Punta Iglesias, where the downtown lights looked blurry through the mist. I remembered a part of the diaries, where Bagabat said the coast of the city doesn't mark the limit of the land, but the border of a wound. That the Salada is the trace of something very old trying to get out from the bottom. I kept walking. I reached the old Casona in La Perla almost out of breath. That place was my refuge since I had to abandon the apartment on Entre Rio Street, an enormous, abandoned property trapped between two modern buildings. I went in and through the bolt with trembling hands. I stood leaning against the wood, listening to the silence of the house, a quietness that suddenly felt too dense, as if the walls were holding their breath with me. I went into the main room and turned on the camping lantern. The yellowish light bounced off the piles of newspapers and folders I had everywhere. I pulled the stone out of my pocket and set it on the oak table. In the dark, the green veins seemed to move, as if there were a thick smoke inside trying to escape. I looked at my right arm under the lantern light and my stomach turned. The matte grayish skin had already claimed my entire wrist, erasing the lines of my skin. In its place, the surface was opening in dry, hard scales, identical to the granite of the breakwater. I tried to close my fist. The cracks sounded dry and deep, a noise of fibers breaking under geological pressure. I sat down, holding my right shoulder with my other hand, crushed by a weight that seemed to pull me straight down to the floor. "What did you do, Bagabat?" I whispered. My own voice sounded strange in the empty room. A continuous hum replaced the silence of the street. A dull, constant hum that made the window panes vibrate. I approached the shutter and looked through a slot. There it was, parked right in front. The white, sturdy silhouette. The lights were off, but the white of the bodywork glowed under the street lamp. No one got out. They simply waited. The hum vibrated in my palate. I looked at my arm under the last thread of light from the lantern. The grayish crust had already climbed above my elbow. The freezing cold from the beginning had disappeared completely, replaced by a dense mineral inertia, a dead and heavy mass that forced me to let my forearm drop onto the oak board. My right arm was no longer mine. Suddenly, the hum outside cut off. The silence that followed hurt in the ears. Then I heard steps in the hallway. A metallic, rhythmic sound, heavy boots on the old parquet. They knocked on the door 3 times, dryly. A voice called me by my name. They spoke to me with a confidence that gave me more fear than a threat. I stayed silent. The door lost its solidity without breaking. I saw how the wood turned to dust in the air, and 3 shadows entered. One of them, a massive guy, occupied the entire frame and carried equipment full of cables and sensors that shrieked as they pointed at my arm. The other scanned the room with a handheld monitor, raising it toward the corners with the concentration of someone looking for a gas leak. The third closed the march, wearing a faux fur coat. Her look did not threaten, it was worse than that, it evaluated. "Let go of the stone," said the big guy, without raising his voice. "Before you become part of the masonry." The Mexican adjusted a device quickly onto my transmuted arm. I felt a fierce electrical discharge that cut off my breath. The sound of quartzite creaking stopped suddenly. The pain blurred my vision and I felt the floor vanish beneath me. I fainted completely. I woke up the next day in a twin-sized bed, in a house on Rawson Street that smelled of strong coffee and tin solder. It took me a few seconds to remember who I was, the same thing that happened to me as a kid after nightmares, when you return from the other side and need the room to explain to you again that it exists. My right arm hurt horribly, but the mineralization had stopped just above the elbow at a precise line where skin ended and quartzite began, cold, dense, rough as breakwater granite. Below the elbow, the arm was rock. Above it, it was mine. That border wasn't going to move. The 3 of them were in the living room, around a coffee table covered in cables, electronic components, and lead plates. The woman took the initiative. She poured me a cup of black coffee and sat opposite me. She let out a dry "Hirosho" to start the talk. "We operate as a containment crew," she said. "We close the tiers before they reach the surface." There was a silence. The Mexican did not look up from the green phosphor screen. "The regulator left a signature in the area," he murmured, without looking at me. "Like a broken tooth in a saw. And your posts on the forums had been pointing to the same place for weeks." The Yankee was leaning against the wall, massive, smoking slowly. "You ran into a dead man's notes," he said, "and you opened a heavy door." He said nothing else. No need to. They offered to let me move into that house. Walls lined with lead and tin, the noise of the world arriving muffled as if from the bottom of a well. The explanation arrived later, in parts, during the following days, each time I asked something and one of the 3 decided that the question deserved an answer. Never in order. Never complete. That was how I learned what I know about the breach. Frank put out his cigarette in a tin ashtray. "Use the terminal," he told me. "Watch the forums. Look for the noise that precedes the fissures, before the surface gives way." I nodded. I took the cup with my left hand, the right no longer closed completely, the quartzite fingers barely responding to the cold of the ceramic. Through the window of the house, very far away, the sea made that noise of always, that noise that one carries so deep inside that one no longer hears it. That night I heard it.